Everyone in Larkspur County will tell you the widow Nora Hale was too kind for her own good, that a woman with a mortgage she couldn't cover, a barn roof half open to the sky, and a husband 3 years in the ground had no business baking pies for the stranger who bought the dead Ansel place next door. But kindness, I've learned, is rarely the simple thing folks take it for. Sometimes it's a woman reaching across a fence because reaching is the only muscle grief left her. And sometimes the man on the other side of that fence has been waiting his whole ruined life for exactly that, and is more afraid of it than of anything the war ever pointed at him. I know because I was that man. And the thing she was about to discover about me was buried so deep I'd half convinced myself even I had forgotten it. Stay with me, this one costs something to tell. The pie came the same night the wind tried to take my roof, which felt, at the time, like a joke somebody upstairs was telling at my expense. I was up on the ladder at the north eave, one boot braced on a rung that had already cracked once and lied to me about it, hammering a sheet of tin back into place while the sky worked itself into a temper. My name is Wade Corliss. I keep a ledger not the kind for money, though I keep one of those too. God knows the bank keeps reminding me. This other ledger is a little green book with a broken spine, and in it I write down the things I do each day, plain in order. Fed the roan. Mended 40 feet of the east wire. Burned the tumbleweed that piled against the gate. I started keeping it because when you've spent years being told where to stand and when to move and what to carry, a man loses the habit of noticing his own hours. The ledger is how I hand them back to myself. It's a small thing. Most of what saves a person is small. So there I was, adding tin on the north eave to the day in my head, when I saw the lantern coming up my drive. It swung low and yellow, and behind it walked a woman I'd seen maybe 4 times in the 2 months since I'd taken over the Ansel spread, always at a distance, always with a fence and my own cowardice between us. Nora Hale. She had a shape you recognized before you knew a single fact about her. Shoulders set like she was carrying something even with her hands empty, and a walk that was careful, the walk of a person who'd learned the hard way that the ground can drop out from under you. Her hands were not empty that night. She had a covered dish balanced against her hip, and she was picking her way across the churned mud between our places with her chin tucked against the wind. "Mr. Corliss," she called up, not loud. She didn't strike me as a woman who wasted volume. "You're going to break your neck up there." "Been trying to for years," I said. "Never quite manage it." I heard her laugh, a short one, surprised out of her, the kind of laugh a person forgets they're capable of and then is faintly embarrassed by. I climbed down. My knees told me about it. When I got to the bottom, she was standing there with the dish held out in both hands like an offering, and the lantern light caught her face for the first time up close. She was younger than the county gossip had made her sound, or maybe grief just ages a name faster than it ages the person. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes and a stubborn set to her jaw, and her hair had come loose from its pins in the wind so that pieces of it stuck to her cheek, and she didn't seem to care. That's the detail I remember. She had walked through a rising storm to bring a stranger a pie, and hadn't spared one thought for how she looked doing it. "It's rhubarb," she said. "First of the season, I made 2. She paused. "It seemed unneighborly, you being over here alone all this time and me not saying a word. My mother would have had something to say about it." "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't." She said it plainly, no offense in it. Then quieter, "I wanted to." I took the dish. It was still warm through the towel, and that warmth went straight up my arms and into some cold place in my chest. I'd kept boarded up for so long I'd stopped thinking of it as a room at all. I stood there like a fool holding a pie while the wind screamed, and I could not, for the life of me, find a single word. "Thank you," I finally managed. It came out rusted. She nodded, satisfied, and turned to go, and that should have been the end of it. A pie, a neighbor, a small mercy in a hard county. But the wind chose that moment to slam my barn door open behind me, and Nora startled and turned back, and the swinging lantern threw its light past me through the open door, and I watched her face change. She'd seen the wall. Inside the barn, on the workbench wall where I keep my tack, I'd hung a pair of spurs. Old ones. The rowels worn down, one strap mended with wire. They aren't mine. They've never been mine. And I keep them where I have to look at them every single day, which I understand is a form of penance, and I do not intend to defend it. Nora went very still. The wind kept howling, but something around her had gone dead quiet. "Where," she said, and her voice had changed too, thinned out, careful, "did you get those spurs?" And there it was. 2 months of keeping a fence and a silence between us. 2 months of me telling myself I'd tell her when the time was right, that a right time even existed. And the storm and a swinging door had made the choice for me before I was anywhere near ready. I could have lied. I want you to understand that I stood there and I genuinely considered it. Bought them at auction. Found them in the tack room when I moved in. Don't rightly recall. Any of a dozen small lies and she'd have gone home to her cold house, and I'd have gone back up my ladder and we'd both have been spared. I'm not a good enough man to tell you I didn't think about it. But her eyes were on those spurs like they were a face she knew, and I understood that whatever I said next, I'd be writing it down in the ledger that night, in the same hand as fed the roan and mended the wire, and I would have to look at it. "Come out of the wind," I said. "I'll put coffee on." She didn't move. "Answer the question, Mr. Corliss." "I will." My mouth was dry as chalk. "But not standing in a gale, please." Something in the please got to her, or maybe it was just that the sky opened up right then, and the rain came down like it had been saving up all spring. She followed me to the house. I should tell you about the house, because a house tells you things about a man he won't say himself. Mine was near empty. A table, 2 chairs, a stove, a cot I hadn't gotten around to replacing with a proper bed. A single shelf with the little green ledger and its brothers on it. I'd filled 4 of them since the war. No pictures, no curtains. A man living like he expected to be told to move on any minute and didn't want to leave much behind. Nora took it all in the way women do, one slow sweep, and I saw her make some private accounting of me. She didn't look pleased or displeased, just informed. I set the pie down. I put the coffee on, and my hands were not steady, and she watched them not be steady. "My husband had spurs like those," she said to my back. Whitman Hale. He wore them near 20 years, his father's before him. A breath. He took them with him when he shipped out. Said they were his luck. He wrote me about them from a hospital in England, said even when they took his boots the spurs stayed by his cot. Her voice did something complicated. He never came home. Neither did the spurs. The army sent back his ring and his letters and a folded flag, and that was the whole of it. I turned around. "Those are Whit's spurs on your wall," she said. It wasn't a question anymore. "Aren't they?" The coffee was doing nothing. The rain was doing everything. I have faced men who meant to kill me and felt steadier than I felt in my own kitchen looking at that woman. "They are," I said. She sat down. Not because she chose to, I think because her legs quit. She put both hands flat on my bare table like she needed to feel something solid. "Then you knew him," she said. "I did." "How?" And this is the moment. If you're the kind of person who likes a story wrapped up neat, where I'd have told her everything and we'd have wept and been done. But I have never in my life gotten anything over with cleanly, and I wasn't about to start. Because to tell Nora Hale how I knew her husband was to tell her the last thing his eyes ever saw, and the choice I made in the second before, and I was not standing there with her dead man's spurs on my wall and her rhubarb pie on my table. I was not able to open that door all the way. Not yet. "We served together," I said. "France, then Belgium. He was in my unit the last 10 months. "The last," she repeated, and caught the word the way I'd hoped she wouldn't. She was sharper than her kindness let on. "You were there when he—" I need you to let me tell it in order, I said, and I heard my own voice crack down the middle, or I won't get through it at all. Can you do that for me, please? She studied me for a long moment. Whatever she saw, and I've wondered since what it was, whether it was grief she recognized because it matched her own, or just the sight of a grown man holding himself together with wire like my barn door, she gave me a single nod. In order then, she said. But Mr. Corliss, she leaned forward, you're going to tell me all of it, every part. You brought his spurs to the ranch next to mine and you kept your distance for 2 months. That's not the behavior of a man with nothing to say. She was right, it wasn't. I'd bought the Ansel place because it was next to hers. I'd stood at that fence 100 times meaning to walk up her drive and knock, and 100 times I'd turned back, because how do you introduce yourself to a woman as the last thing keeping her husband company when he died? You can't lead with that. There's no weather for that conversation. So I'd waited, coward that I am, waited and mended fence and fed the roan and wrote it all down in the green book and pretended I was just a neighbor who hadn't gotten around to saying hello, when the truth is I'd crossed 2 states and spent every dollar I had to end up close to her without ever having to be brave enough to actually reach her. And then she'd reach first, with a pie. All right, I said. I poured the coffee. My hands had steadied. Funny how the body settles once the worst is already loose in the room. I sat down across from my dead friend's wife. All right, Mrs. Hale. In order. The rain came down. The lantern guttered. Somewhere out in the dark my north eave was probably coming loose again, and I did not care. I told her how I met Whit Hale, how he'd walked into a muddy French billet with those spurs jingling on boots that had no earthly business having spurs at all, and how a sergeant had chewed him raw about it, and how Whit had looked that sergeant dead in the eye and said them spurs were the only thing reminding him he was a man and not a number, and could the sergeant kindly leave them be. I told her how the whole unit had loved him for it. How he talked about her, about Nora, the way other men talked about a warm place they were trying to get back to. How he kept her picture in his helmet liner and it went soft and gray from sweat and he'd hold it up to the light and say, "That's the one waiting on me. That's the reason." I watched her face while I said it, and I watched something break open in her that had clearly been sealed shut a long time, because a widow gets everyone's pity but almost nobody's memory. Nobody had told Nora Hale who her husband was over there. The army sends a flag. The army does not send the story of how a man made 100 frightened boys laugh in a flooded trench. I was giving her back a piece of him she'd never had, and I could see it landing like water on ground that had been dry for years. He was funny, she said, wondering. People forget that. Everybody remembers him serious. He wasn't. He was so funny. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. I'd forgotten the sound of it. Isn't that a terrible thing? I couldn't remember his laugh anymore and I hated myself for it, and here you are just handing it back. He'd want you to have it, I said. She looked at me then, really looked, and I felt her getting close to the edge of the thing I wasn't ready to say, the how, the last 10 seconds, the choice. I felt her circling it. But it was near midnight, and she'd been crying without seeming to notice, and the rain had settled into a steady drum, and some mercy in her, or maybe just exhaustion, decided the rest could wait. She stood to go. At the door she stopped, and without turning around she said, "The pie, when you cut into it," a pause, "it's the recipe he liked. I don't know why I made his. I haven't made his in 3 years. She shook her head at herself. I suppose I knew, some part of me, that I was bringing it to somebody who'd know what it meant. Then she stepped out into the wet dark and was gone, her lantern swinging away across the mud toward her own cold house. I did not sleep. I sat at the table until the storm blew itself out and gray light came up in the window, and then I got the green ledger down and I opened it and I wrote, in the same plain hand as everything else. Tin on the north eave, fed the roan. Nora Hale came with a pie, told her some of it, not the last of it, not yet. God help me, not yet. Then I cut a slice of the rhubarb, and I ate it standing up at the window while the sun came over her ridge. And it was the best thing I'd tasted in 3 years, and I cried the whole way through it like the ruined old fool I am. The windmill is where the trouble started, or where the healing started, depending which end of it you're looking from. With Nora Hale, I came to understand those were often the same door. Let me back up. There was a thing I'd been doing at night that I hadn't told her, and after the pie I kept right on doing it, and my not telling her was its own small cowardice stacked on the pile of larger ones. I'll get to it. For 3 days after the storm we didn't speak. I saw her at her chores across the fence and she saw me, and we each lifted a hand, and that was all. I think we both needed the space to hold what had been opened. Grief is a private animal, and it doesn't like to be watched while it moves. On the 4th day she came again, this time in daylight, this time without a pie but with a photograph. I want you to see him, she said, holding it out over the fence rail. The way I knew him, since you gave me the way you knew him, seems only fair. The photo was Whit on their wedding day, younger than the man I'd known, his hair slicked flat and a grin on him fit to split his face. Nora beside him in a plain dress, and God, she was radiant. That's the only word, I'm sorry for the poetry of it, but there isn't another. Radiant in a way 3 years of debt and dust and pity had worn down but not out. You could still see her in the woman across the fence. The stubborn set of the jaw was the same, the eyes. He looks happy, I said. He was terrified, she said, and laughed. Shaking like a wet dog, his mother had to redo his tie 4 times. She took the photo back and looked at it herself. We had 11 years. People say that like it's a comfort. 11 years, as if a number ever kept anybody warm. She tucked the photo into her apron. I don't need it to be a comfort. I need it to be true is all. I need somebody to remember it was real. It was real, I said. I remember. That's when she looked past me, up the slope of my land, and frowned. When did you put up a windmill? I felt the floor of my stomach drop. Because up on the rise behind my house, half-built, its blades not yet mounted, its tower catching the afternoon light, stood a windmill. And it wasn't mine. That is, I was building it with my own 2 hands, mostly after dark, but it wasn't for me. That's Whit's windmill, I said, because I was tired to death of lying to this woman, and every lie cost more than it saved. That's the one he meant to build you. She went white, then red, then something I couldn't name. How do you know about that? She whispered. Here is the thing about Whitman Hale. In the last 10 months of his life, in the mud and the cold, when other men talked about steak dinners and clean sheets and women who were not their wives, Whit talked about a windmill. He was going to build his Nora a windmill on the rise behind their house so she'd never have to haul water by hand again, and he had it all worked out, the height, the well he'd sink, the trough he'd run to the kitchen garden so she could grow her mother's roses. He drew it in the dirt with a stick. He drew it so many times the other men gave him grief about it. There goes Hale and his damn windmill. But he'd just grin and keep drawing because that windmill wasn't a windmill. It was every day he meant to have and hadn't had yet. It was the whole future, folded up small enough to carry through a war. He made me promise once. Cold night, both of us sure we'd freeze before we'd ever see a fight. He said, Corliss, if I don't make it back, you go build Nora that windmill. Don't let her haul water, promise me. And I laughed and said he'd build it himself, and he grabbed my arm hard and said, Promise me, Wade, and I stopped laughing and I promised. I told her all of that over the fence in the plain afternoon light, and I watched Nora Hale come apart and hold herself together at the same time, which is a thing only the strongest people can do, and it is terrible to witness. You crossed 2 states, she said when she could speak, and spent your money on the land next to mine, and you've been building my husband's windmill in the dark like some kind of ghost, and you weren't ever going to tell me. I was going to tell you when it was finished, I said. I thought, I don't know what I thought, that I could give it to you done. That it'd hurt less coming as a gift than as a reminder. I've been getting it wrong. I get most things wrong. Why in the dark, Wade? And there was anger in it now, real anger, and I welcomed it, because anger from her felt more honest than the careful kindness. Why sneak? Because I couldn't stand you watching me do it, I said, and my voice broke clean in half. Because every board I nail up is a day he should have been nailing it and wasn't. Because it's the easiest promise I ever made and the hardest one to keep, and I didn't want you seeing my face while I kept it. That's the whole cowardly truth of it. I've been building your husband's dream at night so nobody had to see me do it wearing my own guilt. The word landed between us like a dropped tool. Guilt. She heard it. Of course she heard it. She'd been circling it since the first night, and now I'd set it down in plain view. Guilt for what? She said, very quiet, all the anger drained out and something far more dangerous in its place. Wade, guilt for what? And I couldn't. Even then, with the windmill standing half-built between us like an accusation, I couldn't get the last of it out. I looked at her and I opened my mouth and nothing came, and after a long moment she nodded slowly, like a woman confirming a thing she'd suspected and dreaded. You were the last one with him, she said. You said the last 10 months. You've got his spurs, they don't send spurs home, so somebody took them off him and that somebody was you. You were right there. Her hand had come up to her throat. Something happened at the end. Something you did or didn't do. That's what all this is. She gestured at the windmill, at my empty house behind me, at the whole shape of my ruined, careful life. This isn't a promise you're keeping, or it's not only that. This is you trying to pay for something. I've been called a lot of things in my life. Nobody has ever seen through me that fast or that clean. Nora, I said. Her name. First time I'd used it. Please, I'll tell you. I swear before God I'll tell you all of it. But I'm asking you for a little more time, not because I want to keep it from you, but because once I say it, it's said, and you'll look at me a certain way for the rest of both our lives, and I've had so few days of you not looking at me that way that I'm being greedy. I'm sorry, that's the truth. I'm being greedy with the time before you hate me. She stared at me over that fence rail for what felt like a year. I don't hate you, she said finally. I don't know what I feel, but it isn't that. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, brisk, done with crying for now. Finish the windmill, I'll help you. I'm not going to stand across a fence and watch you carry my husband's dream alone. That's not right, that's not no. We finish it together, and when it's done. She squared those carrying shoulders. When it's done, you'll tell me the last of it, all of it, and we'll deal with what comes. You don't have to help me. I know I don't. The same words as the pie. The exact same words and the same plain force behind them. I want to. So that's how it went through the back half of that spring. Nora Hale and I built a dead man's windmill together, board by board in the daylight now, because she wouldn't let me hide in the dark anymore. She was good with her hands, better than me at the fine work, the fitting and the leveling. She'd grown up on a hardscrabble place and knew tools the way some women knew thread. We talked while we worked. Not about the war, not yet, not about the thing waiting at the end of it. We talked about wit, safe stories, funny ones, the ones that didn't cut too deep. She told me how he proposed by pretending he'd lost his grandmother's ring and making her help him look for it, and how she'd cried when she found it because she thought she'd made him lose an heirloom, and how he'd knelt down right there in the creek mud. I told her how he'd once traded his boots to a French farmer for a chicken, and cooked it for the whole squad, and got dysentery for his trouble and swore it was worth it. We laughed. God help me, we laughed a lot building that windmill, and every laugh had wit in it, so that raising his tower stopped feeling like penance and started feeling, I don't know how to say it right, like keeping him company. Like the three of us were doing it together, and one of us just happened to be gone. There was one evening near the end. We'd mounted the blades that afternoon and they weren't turning yet, waiting on the tail vane, and we sat on the tailgate of my truck eating cold chicken and watching the light go gold on the still blades. And Nora said, not looking at me, I need to tell you something and I need you not to make a thing of it. Building this with you, these weeks, it's the first time since he died I've felt like a person and not a situation to be pitied. So whatever you tell me at the end, however bad it is, I want you to know I had this first. You gave me back my husband's laugh, and then you gave me weeks where I didn't have to be the poor widow Hale. I'll hold both of those against whatever's coming. So don't you dare think you've only got bad news for me. You don't. You've already given me the good. I couldn't answer her. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't have come out as weeping. The blades caught a breath of wind and turned once, slow, and stopped. Both of us watched it like it was a sign, though neither of us said so. The vein went on 2 days later. The windmill was done. And I had run all the way out of time. She came at dusk, the evening after we set the vein, because we'd both known without saying it that this was the night. The windmill was turning, full and easy in the evening wind, the blades throwing a slow shadow that swept across the rise and over both our houses, hers and mine, in a long, lazy arc. Whit's windmill, watering both our lands now. She'd insisted on that, run the trough down to feed both gardens. He'd want the neighbor to have water too, she'd said, and neither of us had pointed out that the neighbor was me. We stood at the base of it. The well pump knocked and gurgled somewhere below. She'd brought no pie this time, no photograph, nothing in her hands. Just herself in a clean dress, her hair pinned up proper, like a woman come to hear a verdict and meaning to hear it with her spine straight. "Tell me," she said. So I told her. I told her it was February. I told her it was cold in a way that got into your bones and stayed, and that we'd been pinned in a farmhouse for 2 days, 6 of us, waiting on a relief that kept not coming. I told her the shell came through the east wall at first light and took the roof and half the men with it, and that Whit and I were the 2 still on our feet after, and that we had to move or die, and there was one way out across an open yard, under a gun that had the whole yard sighted. I told her we drew for who went first to draw the fire, so the other could make the door. I told her I lost. And here is where I stopped, because this is the part I had never said out loud to a living soul, the part I'd carried across 2 states and buried under a windmill. I lost the draw, I said, which meant I went first. I was meant to go first, into the yard, into the gun, so Whit could run for the door while they were shooting at me. That was the draw, that was fair. I lost fair, and I was meant to run into that gun. Nora had gone still as stone. And I froze, I said. Nora, I froze. I stood in that doorway and my legs would not. I could see the yard and I could not make myself go. And every second I stood there was a second the relief might come or might not. And Whit looked at me and he saw it. He saw I couldn't do it and he didn't say a word. He just put his hand flat on my chest and moved me back out of the doorway. Gentle, like you'd move a spooked horse. And he went instead. The windmill turned. The shadow swept over us. He went into the yard that was mine to go into, I said, and my voice was not a voice anymore, it was something coming apart. He drew the fire that was meant for me, and I made the door. I made the door because he was in that yard being shot at instead of me, and the relief came 4 minutes later. 4 minutes, Nora. If I'd had 4 more minutes of nerve, if I'd just held on, nobody would have had to cross that yard at all. But I broke, and he covered for me, and he died doing the thing I couldn't, and the last thing he ever did on this earth was save the life of a coward who'd lost the draw fair and square. I made myself look at her. I took his spurs off him after, I said, before the grave's detail. I don't rightly know why. I think I couldn't stand the idea of them going in the ground. They were the only thing reminding him he was a man and not a number. He told a sergeant that first week I knew him, and I couldn't, they had to stay above ground. Somebody had to keep them where they'd be looked at. So I've looked at them, every day, for 3 years. And when I got out I found out where you were and I bought the land next to yours and I started building his windmill because it was the one thing I could do that he'd asked me to do, the only promise of his I could still keep since I'd already failed the big one. That's it. That's the whole of it. That's the incredible discovery, if you want to call it that. Your husband died because I couldn't, and I've spent 3 years trying to be worth it, and I never will be, and I'm sorry. and I understand if you never want to look at me again." I stopped. There was nothing left. I'd set it all down in the dirt at the foot of his windmill, and I stood there emptied out, waiting for her to pick up whatever she was going to pick up and go. For a long time she didn't say anything. The blades turned, the pump knocked, the gold light went to rose and then to gray. And then Nora Hale did the thing I will spend the rest of my life failing to deserve. She said, "You think I don't know my own husband?" I blinked at her. "Whit Hale," she said, and her voice was shaking but it was strong, "did not go into that yard because he was braver than you. He went because he loved somebody standing next to him and he could not stand to watch him die. That's not you failing, Wade. That's him being him." She took a step toward me. "You think if it had gone the other way, if you'd made the door and he'd frozen, you think you wouldn't have gone into that yard for him? Look at me and tell me you wouldn't have." I couldn't tell her that, because I would have. God, I would have gone into that yard for Whit Hale 100 times over, and we both knew it, and that was the whole terrible point. "You'd have gone," she said, reading it off my face. "So don't you sit there and tell me his going means you were less. It means you loved each other. It means when it came down to it, each of you'd have died for the other, and it just happened to be him that got the chance first." She was crying now freely, not hiding it. "You froze for 4 minutes, Wade. You were a frightened boy in a farmhouse full of dead friends, and you froze for 4 minutes, and you've sentenced yourself to 3 years for it. Whit would be furious with you. He would be so angry that you took the best thing he ever did, choosing me a whole life, choosing you a whole life, and turned it into a debt you keep paying. That's not what a gift is. He gave you those minutes. He gave you the door. You've been treating them like a bill." The windmill turned. "I didn't come here to forgive you," she said, "because there's nothing to forgive, and I won't insult his memory by pretending there is. I came here to tell you the debt's not real. It was never real. You've been building a windmill to pay off a loan that doesn't exist." She wiped her face. "So here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to let this thing water both our gardens. And you're going to hang his spurs back up where you can see them, not as a punishment, Wade, but because he'd have liked knowing they were kept by somebody who loved him. And you're going to come eat supper at my table, which has been set for one for 3 years, and I'm about done with that. And someday, not tonight, but someday, you're going to forgive that frightened boy in the farmhouse, because I already have, and it was never my forgiveness you needed, it was your own. And I can't give you that, but I can sit next to you while you find it. I don't remember deciding to. I only remember that I was on my knees in the dirt at the foot of the windmill her husband dreamed for her, and she came down into the dirt with me, and she held on to me while I finally, 3 years late, grieved the man who saved me, and she grieved him too, and the blades turned over both our bent heads, throwing their slow shadow, watering the ground. The pie had started it, a rhubarb pie made from a dead man's favorite recipe, carried through a rising storm by a woman too kind for her own good, to a stranger she didn't know was carrying her husband's spurs and her husband's last minutes and her husband's undreamt windmill all at once. She'd meant it as a simple gift. There's no such thing. Kindness is never the simple thing folks take it for. I hung the spurs back up the next morning. I ate supper at her table that night and the night after. The windmill turned. Larkspur County talked, of course, the widow and the strange neighbor. What would people say? And Nora Hale looked the whole county in its gossiping eye and did not care 1 inch, the same as she hadn't cared about her wind-loose hair that first night. I don't know yet how the rest of it goes. I want to be honest with you about that. I'm not a man who's earned a tidy ending, and I don't trust one. There are mornings the 4 minutes still have me by the throat before I'm even out of the cot. Some things you don't get over. You get through, and you get through them next to somebody, and that's the most that's promised to anybody. But last evening I wrote in the green ledger, in the same plain hand as fed the roan and mended the wire. Windmills turning good, supper at Nora's, told her the last of it, she knew already mostly, kept the spurs. And then, because it was true, And because I've decided to start writing down the true things even when they cost, I added one more line. I think Wit would be glad. I sat with that a while, then I closed the book. The windmill was still turning when I